Do it.
E ngā mana, e ngā hauawha, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, e koa ana te ngākau kua te whakanui I te kaupapa o te rā. Nō reira, e ākau rangatira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So that's just to say welcome to all my esteemed colleagues from the four winds that have brought you here today. And it's really joyous to see you all here for this session. And I think, if I'm right, Aviv, who hosted on Monday, we're just going to begin because there's only 9 of us. To do a really quick introduction to who's in the room, to just say who you are, where you are, and why you came. And we'll begin with Åsa.
Great seeing you all here. I'm Åsa Ståhl. I live in southern Sweden, Northern Europe, and I'm here because I want to think beyond what I see in sort of most everyday life, and I think it's got to do a lot with community and economy and imagining other ways of living, but also drawing on ways of living that are already there. Oh, and then I pass it on to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm here in Tasmania, and I'll pass on to Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather, and I'm here live from Kamloops, British Columbia, or that's colonial known. It's Secwepemcúlecw is the name of the territory. I pass it to Carrie.
Hello, I'm Kerry, and I'm here in Melbourne, Wurundjeri country in Southeast Australia. I'm actually interested in the session. I'm obviously was here for hosting purposes, but I'm also really interested. I hadn't so much thought about the links between community economies and arts. And of course, there's a lot. As soon as you start thinking about it, you can think about a lot. But I'm very fascinated as an amateur musician myself to think about, think about some of those connections and to hear what you think about and what's kind of stuff that you're doing. And I will pass to Graydon.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Graydon Diprose, and I am based in Wellington, or otherwise known as Te Whanganui-a-Tara, New Zealand. And I was just really interested. I did my PhD kind of in art stuff, and I was just really interested to reconnect with it. So yeah, I will pass to Aviv.
Hi, I'm Aviv. I'm here in Hull, in the north of the UK, around 8 p.m. We've been talking about these connections between art and community economies for some time now, with kind of a group of people who do this, well, who are engaged in art, and maybe just some of the people engaged in art in the CERN and the Community Economies Research Network. So that's why I'm here. I'll pass it on to Marcelo.
Perfect timing. So kia ora, I'm Marcela. I'm originally from Chile, but I live in Wellington, actually in Titahi Bay, Porirua. And I'm here because I've done a little bit of work on community economies in the past, and I've done later some work with creative methods, visual methods, but I've never combined. So I'm really interested to, be here and listen and learn and share. And I'll pass it to Kate. Have you spoken already, Kate? Yes. Heather?
But we've got another Kate who's called Community Economies at the moment.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry, I didn't change my name. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm Catherine McKinnon. I'm joining you from Jarrah country in central Victoria in southern Australia. And I wanted to participate, but family circumstances aren't going to let me. But I wanted to at least listen in because I feel like some of the most interesting, imaginative, creative kind of thinking and work that's kind of opening up possibility within that community economies network is being done by those of you who are really engaging in the arts space. So every time I engage with people like Kate Rich and others who are working in this way, it's just always wonderful. So I'm here to listen and gain from your insights and creativity.
Oh, kia ora everybody, thank you. And I'm Molly, and I'm in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland in New Zealand. So same country as Graydon and Marcella, but different place, more fully locked down right now. Awesome to see you. I think we've got 5 presentations today, so we'll go straight into those and we'll have time for questions and discussion. But we might have ask Graydon questions after his, because he's got to go if we've got them. Cool, so I'll hand over to you, Graydon.
Cool, thanks, Molly. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen and is that working for you guys? Can you see some fabric? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to work out. It's taken my notes. I can't see my notes. So I'm just going to try and work out how to get my notes back. Is that still a full screen for you?
No.
No.
I know how to do this, I think.
Do you, Molly? Okay.
I think I do. I think if you press on that little book, that might work. The little book icon at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, that one there?
Does that?
Has that?
Can you see your notes now?
Yes, I can. Can you guys see the pictures?
We can see
great.
the slides.
Cool. Thank you, Molly. The things you have to learn, eh? Right. So in 2018, I had a wage job that turned out to be very stressful and a bad fit for me. So to get through it, I started hand stitching together linen and cotton offcuts of fabric. And the things I made were kind of somewhere between quilts and wall hangings, but I didn't really follow any techniques that others would recognize as quilting or needlework. So my approach was very intuitive and just, I think in retrospect, it was kind of mainly a way to manage my anxiety by just feeling the fabrics and using the repetition of stitching to escape from thoughts about my waged job. So since 2018, I've been stitching, and in 2020 in particular, I ended up doing quite a few. So I'm just going to kind of basically show you some of the things I've been making. So this was the first slide I did, first wall hanging I did in 2018. So I used old fabric that my boyfriend had and some offcuts I found in secondhand stores. So at that time, I was living in a huge old rundown villa, and it had 3.5 meter high ceilings. So the walls just went on forever, and we hardly had any furniture. So the wall hangings worked well in that big old house. This was the second one I made in 2018. And again, I used a mixture of kind of secondhand and found fabric. Again, this one worked really well in the hallway of that big old house. So I made this one for some friends as a housewarming present in 2019. And kind of similar to the other ones, it was just a mixture of secondhand and new fabric. So this next one I also made for some friends who had just bought a house in Wellington in 2019, and they were feeling quite weird about buying a house. There's currently a housing crisis in New Zealand at the moment. Housing affordability and quality is, I think, probably almost or the worst in the OECD countries. And Wellington was also recently named the second most unaffordable city in the world for housing. So my friends were feeling quite ambivalent about their house. They kind of simultaneously felt lucky to be able to even afford a house, but really frustrated the amount of debt they'd signed up for, guilty that they had kind of the privilege to afford a house when so many others couldn't. And of course, really pissed off at the wider socioeconomic culture in New Zealand that had created the housing crisis. So this included kind of like the neoliberal restructuring in the 80s and 90s, the ongoing sale and gutting of state housing over the last 30 years, the baby boomer generation that have seen housing as an investment and their refusal to like institute a capital gains tax, and no security of tenure for renters, etc. So it was all of this kind of stuff that was kind of playing into their ambivalence around owning a house. So I made this wall hanging for their bathroom because it was really noisy, and we hoped that the fabric would help soften the room and kind of reduce some of the noise. I also made it for them because I was feeling the same kind of ambivalence about owning a house. My boyfriend and I had just bought a place that was ridiculously expensive a few months before them, so I could really, yeah, just resonated with me. This next one I made for my friend Michelle, who is directing a movie called Millie Lies Low, which has just come out in the New Zealand Film Festival now. It was essentially a prop as part of the art department for the bedroom of the main character, Millie. And Millie loves New York, and the design was kind of inspired by the High Line in New York. This is the only wall hanging that I've been paid for with money. So my friend Michelle paid for it because she had a bit of a budget. The film was partially funded by the New Zealand Film Commission. So it is now hanging in my friend's house, who is also the art director of the film. So it's in their bedroom. This one here I made for my friend Jo. It was her 40th birthday last year, and we were all stuck in lockdown. So it just felt kind of nice to make something for her given the circumstances. This one here I made for that same friend Michelle, who's the film director. So she had really liked the other wall hanging for the movie, and she was stuck at home in Auckland during large parts of last year when we were locked down. So I just figured it'd be nice to send her something that she could hang in her home. And this was the first time I experimented with a different shape. I went for bit of an asymmetrical shape. So I made these two wall hangings, they're kind of smaller ones, in 2020. So I was a donor for some close friends. They're a queer couple who ended up having twins. And it was the twins' 3rd birthday in October 2020. And I made these for their birthday. So the one on the left is inspired by the night sky, and the one on the right, that's for Max because he likes looking at the stars. And the one on the right is inspired by autumn leaves, and that's for Charlie because he likes leaves. So it's all super literal stuff. So I'm not the primary parent, and the twins don't call me dad or anything, but I do see them regularly. And my friends, the two mothers, have put the hangings up in the twins' room above their beds. So there's not like a whole lot of traditions or expectations for queer families like ours, but it just felt kind of like something to do to make them these hangings. And I like knowing that they can look up at them and have craft in their life like I did as a child. So this is one of my more recent ones. I had planned that it would go somewhere in my house, but I haven't yet quite found the right place. And this is the one I'm currently working on. It's for my friend Christy. She makes pottery and has given me lots of her work over the last few years, so I figured it was time to reciprocate. The blue at the top will be totally covered, and the color vibe is a kind of 70s. She's going to hang it in her office at work, which is currently a blank kind of 70s cubicle. So when Molly, Heather and Aviv sent out the call for these sessions, I felt a little bit odd responding. So I'd never thought of myself as an artist, but throughout my life, I've always kind of made things. When I was around 12, I was obsessed with making puppets. I really loved the Muppet Show, and so I made lots of kind of Muppet puppets. And as a kid, I spent a whole lot of time with my mum and grandmother, and they both taught me how to knit and sew. I think for my grandmother in particular, craft was kind of an unremarkable and everyday part of her life. Both I suppose a gendered expectation, but I also think kind of an enjoyable activity at times. My grandmother died in 2018, and we hadn't really spoken since 2011 when she told me I was going to hell for being gay. And it was a really weird conversation because after she said that, we both laughed. It was kind of like we realized how ridiculous it sounded, but it was also the end of us having any kind of honest relationship. So doing these wall hangings has just felt really necessary over the last few years, like almost compulsive at times. And I think they've kind of helped me reconnect with making stuff that I used to love as a kid and get into that kind of gentle flow and escape, especially from all the craziness and noise of the pandemic, the US elections, and the kind of rising eco-anxiety associated with climate change and biodiversity crisis and stuff. Making has also reminded me of the importance of craft as like a feminist practice, I suppose, and also reconnecting with stuff that my grandmother and I used to share and enjoy. As I was preparing these slides, I was struck by the way the hangings both foster and reflect different kind of relationships in my life. Heather and I also had a few emails about this session, and it was mainly me just to be like, oh, I don't know if I should be talking about this stuff. It's kind of lame and boring. But she reminded me of Indigenous scholars she works with who say that the making is the theory, and that Eurocentric, like capitalist discourses, can strip us of our love of just making. So for me, that's like of touching and crafting the beautiful things that we just kind of like and want to share with others. So yeah, preparing these slides has reminded me of how important this all is. So thanks, Heather, Molly, and Aviv for creating this opportunity that I can share these with you. And that is me. So I will stop sharing.
Graydon, thank you. That was so beautiful. Because Graydon has to go shortly, would anybody like to comment or ask him anything?
More of a comment, maybe. It's just thanks. These are just really just very beautiful. I almost made me cry. Really, it's just so nice. Just and how each one of these objects is just like part of it's just the way you explain them, how they're just like just mixed up with the relationships. You like there's never like it's not, even though if you just showed them to me without even the stories, I would already be like have like probably an emotional response. But I don't know. That's not a very insightful comment, but thanks.
Thanks, Aviv. That's lovely.
I go next. Oh, sorry. I also not a question and not necessarily a comment, just, thanking you for sharing beautiful pieces. Sorry for the background noise. Beautiful pieces. Yeah, impressive. Really, really beautiful and touching. And yeah, and so profound the way you were talking about, how you came to produce them and what they meant and what you, how you woven into them so many relationships and love and care and, other complexities like the politics around the housing market, So I hope you don't find yourself forcing yourself to find a big theory, but keep going in the way you're going, because it's very intuitive, but very deep, very profound, and very touching and very honest. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Marcella. I think that was kind of one of my anxieties around even talking about them, because I was like, I don't know what the theory is. Like it, yeah, it felt like, yeah. So, but it was lovely to kind of be like, actually, I don't have to think like that. So yeah, that was, yeah.
And I find that tension with the work I do with Arpillera, also textile, very different, but it's that tension between the doing and everything you bring into the doing. And then when you come back to academia, feeling forced to kind of think and move away from all the tactile or the doing, all the, that's the thing. But then you have to write about it or talk about it in ways that kind of kill that.
Yeah.
I haven't solved the mystery. That's a tension I haven't worked out, but yeah, thank you.
So I did have a question, which is do you think, so you're sort of describing the this way of working as a, really like a retreat from the anxiety of academic life. And can you see any way that these things might mesh?
Not yet. I haven't thought about how they can come into my current work and job. Yeah, but that's a good question, Kate. One I'll need to muse on, I think.
My pleasure.
Should we go to... carry on, Graydon.
No.
Maybe also,
yeah, maybe I can ask then, because I'm not just thinking about theorizing, but also materializing. So are there other materials that you want to work with? Like, would that make, what would happen to the kinds of relationships that you're both part of building and working through?
another good question. Not one I've really thought about. I suppose in terms of materials, I've gotten as far as trying like different types of fabrics, like corduroy, cotton, and linen. That's as far as I've gotten. But yeah.
But I guess I'm perhaps thinking of also of where those materials come from. I mean, what kinds of relationships were they already part of? We all wear textiles, so I assume both the helpful, generative, but also the troublesome relationships were somehow textilized. Could you say that? I mean, are there some kind of traces that you could work with?
Yeah. I think as part of this, I have started following a lot more kind of debates around textiles and production, end of life kind of stuff. Microplastics, shedding of synthetic materials, pollution of waterways and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely kind of in the back of my mind, and I try and use all found stuff or 100% organic, but yeah, that's a really interesting way that I could think about moving this, informing.
Cool.
Catherine,
Kat?
have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Gradian. I just I don't really have a question about it, more like a reflection of just what a lovely practice and a way of thinking of it as a kind of therapeutic practice where you're bringing in a set of ethics into a practice without that expectation and that need to put the overlays of theory on. But for me, I'm actually finding it inspiring because I feel like one of my practices in the very stressful job is really akin to that kind of work that you do with textiles and the repetition of the act when you're sewing stitches. And so for me, it's offering a really nice way to reflect on how sewing, how that kind of textile making can help to inform a different way of doing the work, to not worry so much that I feel like I'm just repeating again and again the same things, having to say the same messages over and over again and feeling frustrated about that. In actual fact, if it's a practice of creating a beautiful textile, repetition of movement is part of that practice. So I just thought it was really lovely to hear your story about doing that. Thank you for sharing it.
Thanks, Catherine. I really like that. The repetition, touching on the repetition of that. So I also remember a senior academic once said the people who survive in academia have hobbies. And I heard that quite a few years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, I like that. So I think that was kind of in the back of my mind a little bit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graydon, and thank you for making time to be here with us this morning. We'll make sure you get the recording so you can hear everybody else's
look forward to that.
Sharing too. And hopefully I'll see you soon on another Zoom.
Yes, sounds good. See you, folks.
Bye. All right, and we'll hand over to Åsa.
Thank you very much. And find full screen. There we go. Yeah, I'm really happy to be gathering with you because I've already in the sort of pre-talks been gaining a lot from just being in this discussion about arts and community economies. I'm a lecturer in design and a design researcher. And I just perhaps, well, design is often, for the market, but what we're trying to do where I am and in my collaborations, it's not just to do design for the market, not just do the new, but of course we're part of making futures, giving shape and form to that which is to come. And my own version is kind of a combination of participatory design, critical speculations, feminist technoscience, and my, trying to build up to community economies, understandings and doings. With my long-term collaborator, Kristina Lindström, with whom I I've been collaborating for 20 years. We did a joint PhD thesis and a joint postdoc as well. We started the Unmaking Studio to sort of emphasize that design is not only part of making the new, but we're also really unmaking things and making some things more or less impossible. And not only turning towards the future, but also turning to what has been. So move from a kind of what was to what is and what if. But what I want to like share with you and open up, because I'm in the very, very beginnings of this project, Holding Surplus House. It sort of builds on the Greek word oikos, as in economy and ecology, and holding house, but trying to explore how to produce a kind of surplus and not only use resources, but also produce a kind of surplus of resources and value and so on. It's, it's modeled on permaculture in many ways. Year 1, focus on care for people. Year 2, care for earth. 3rd year, fair share of the surplus. And 4th year, try to actually make a tiny house on wheels travel. So we're building up a household in a tiny house on wheels, and creating in co-creation sessions, living in it, trying to distribute it, and then share it further. And there are various collaborators, such as my own university, of course, Swedish School of Textiles. So we're going to work with living textiles. And particularly this person, Svenja Köhne, she's been working with textiles where things can grow. So it's living fabrics, but also working with wood and soil. And Växjö Konsthall, an art gallery, is also one of our partners. Not necessarily to go there, to go to an institution and show within a gallery, but to work with their knowledge around art pedagogics, for example. And so this is where it's sort of all combined. And one of the collaborators, Svenja, she already lives in a tiny house on wheels. So she has a lot of experience, and she's been using it as her own prototype for another kind of another kind of living that's already in the now, but also prefiguring something, which builds a lot more on relationships and careful resource usage. And we did a film, so there's a 2-minute film if you want to see it, where we sort of try to say what's going to happen. And the only, I guess, concrete thing I can share with you right now is that we're planning a workshop, sort of what I think of. I don't know if you're familiar with Ursula K. Le Guin's text on the theory. Oh, it's so late, I can't even remember the title. The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, where she's sort of saying, well, hang on, the origin story of the big man going out to hunt is not really perhaps the story we should repeat, but more of thinking of how are we carrying things, how are we sort of able to carry both perhaps children, but also food and surplus from one place to another. And this is connecting several different kinds of dots, and I'm just going to briefly mention it here, but the bodies of this household that we're building up will sometimes produce a surplus of blood. And we're thinking of making homemade biodegradable menstrual cups together with Marie-Louise Juhl Söndergaard, another design researcher. She's been doing biodegradable menstrual pads, but they're all outside of the body. So what's happening when we really work with also collecting, so we can then share back to Earth. So that's also a way of thinking of what's happening inside the home, behind some hidden walls, what can sort of move from the private to the public, as a way of expanding the kitchen, the household as an economic base into the public. And this is also something I've been trying with my students in the program that's called Design Plus Change, where I teach the most. I've given them the assignment, or me and my colleagues, we've given them the assignment of fair share of domestic surplus, where they've been mapping surpluses that they, or actually it's more of resources, and then how they can turn those resources into surpluses and then share them. And we also invited international lecturers to get help in thinking and in with examples. And the question was, can designers produce excess in their home environment and distribute it in a fair way? And I guess what we saw was that, yes, of course, change processes can start where we're located and in ongoing engagements. And we don't have to go big. That's another thing with design. We really often want to scale up. Can we think of scale in a different way? Perhaps not as in scale up, but as in multiplicity, for example, and in relationships that grow. And the students took on this challenge last year and also this year. And I guess as a kind of conclusion of some kind, yes, what I think is beautiful with this relationship building is that they can start off really small and in a like what seems like a confined economic sphere, but then they start seeing how it's connected to much broader ones. So that's what I thought I'd sort of share as, you know, in the very beginning of the research project, but there is a plan and there is an openness. So if anybody wants to collaborate somehow, I don't know if the tiny house on wheels can travel extremely far. We're now thinking of a 300 kilometers radius, but you know, in theory or in the abstract or through Zoom or whatever, there are many. I hope there are many openings the coming years to both think and perhaps work with you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Åsa. Aviv, what worked well on Monday? Did you do all the presentations and then have conversation afterwards?
We left all the questions for after all the presentations, all the questions and conversation. Yeah, I think it worked pretty well because then it was more about people's reflections about maybe several of the presentations. I don't know.
Yeah, let's do that, and then we make sure everybody has plenty of time to present and don't feel rushed. But thank you, Åsa. And so Heather, we're over to you.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm Toby Sharp. I know a lot of you read my work at CERN and a lot of you follow my reading and my writing. I write about innovation and creativity and how art drives local economies. So I'm going to present to you from some of my presentations here based in Kamloops. So bear with me. Well, hang on a sec. Get this PowerPoint going. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So I'm Toby Sharp. I'm a professor, an energy healer, a creativity expert. I'm an influencer, and a lot of you follow my work. I know that already. And I'm working right now in Kamloops. I've just started collaborating with Donnie Dreamcatcher, pictured here in the middle of the slide. Donnie is an Indigenous, he's a Secwepemc wrestling coach who's also interested in wellness and innovation and economic development here in Kamloops. I also want to point out this beard I grew. As I do a lot of meditation work, I'm out in the forest thinking about how to better promote local microbreweries and former mining communities. So that's where the beard is from. But I'm working with Donnie Dreamcatcher. And this is just to give you context. We're in Kamloops. The city here has branded the area the tournament capital of Canada. We're here situated in the mountains. We're 4 hours from Vancouver and 4 hours to the Rocky Mountains at the very end of the Sierra Nevada desert. So a town of 90,000 people. This is a picture from a presentation I did in Toronto. And I always say that I'm a tool for urban change. And it's so important that you think of ways you use your arts to be a tool for promoting economic development, promoting urban regeneration, attracting private investment in your community, which is what Donnie and I are doing. So I'm just going to talk about one of our projects. This is a Tmx Pipeline. This is a large pipeline that's coming through our region right now. It is coming from the Alberta tar sands, and it'll bring 140,000 barrels of crude bitumen. Bitumen is black, sludgy, highly toxic material that was 140,000 barrels of this is coming through our region, across from Alberta, right down to Vancouver and on to boats. Our handsome Prime Minister, who says he's a feminist, is a huge supporter of this project, as he's over at COP26 in Glasgow right now. So it's an exciting time for pipeline development. So Indigenous land defenders in this territory, especially women land defenders and elders, are very much against this pipeline, because it's not as if scientists say it's not if a pipeline will spill, but when a pipeline will spill. And they're going right under our rivers and lots of salmon habitat. But you know what? Donnie Dreamcatcher and I just say, you've got to reframe that. If you have multiple types of chemicals and oil sludge go into the rivers, you know, we've got to think of the positives. This is a salmon. Kamloops is known for one of the largest sockeye salmons in the world. And one oil spill will destroy the salmon habitat. But you know what? They're unattractive. Look at that pointy, weird nose. Look at that hump. These are not conventionally attractive fish. And, you know, maybe it's time they, you know, hit the road with an oil spill. Also, a lot of oil salmon around this area now are showing signs of being lice and infected because they're escaping from commercial fish farms. So, you know, if a salmon can't keep it together and stay hygienic, well, maybe it's time we rethink what kind of fish we want around here. So it's all about, Donnie and I are about rethinking salmon. We're also thinking about maybe we can have fish farms for conventionally attractive fish, like these little beautiful goldfish, and sell them at the shopping centers around here. We thought we could work with, there's a housing crisis here. We can work with young women artists, designing art on the fish farms. This picture here I found of yarn bombing of some dock machinery. Well, anyways, we can put crafts and art on the fish farms. And I'd like to also show you that at our presentations, we've been working with a young man named Derek. He's our intern. I don't have a photo of Derek. We've been doing live performances, but we've been presenting online here the past year, but Derek also sneaks out information to the people attending our presentations about tenant unions addressing the housing crisis in our province, and about ways to work with solidarity amongst precarious arts workers and workers. You know, it's frustrating. Donnie and I find Derek a little bit radical, but you know, he always manages to slip in some activism, which gives a little spice to our presentations. So I just wanted to show you what we're up to here, Donnie Dreamcatcher and I in Kamloops. So I'm gonna move ahead. Just show you, this is a slide by Tanya Willard. She's an Indigenous artist here, based in Secwepemcúlecw, and this is one of her murals at the Kamloops Art Gallery. So just 1 second here. Okay, so that's so back to this. Yeah, I do want to start with a real land acknowledgement. I never make fun of land acknowledgements in presentations, but I am presenting from Kamloops to Secwepem, which is in the interior of what's colonial called British Columbia. And I grew up here, and then I left. Since I was 18, I lived mostly in Toronto, where I worked. But I've been working for an online university in this area, and I've moved back here for the past couple of years, and I'm extending my work here. Yeah, I'm really interested in thinking about, with community economies research, the concept of cabaret as research praxis, and how this can contribute to thinking about community economies and arts and practice. So when I lived in Toronto, I worked in community development planning before I started a PhD while in my mid-30s. And before that, I worked in community development in housing and homelessness, so shelter housing and support for the city of Toronto and for a few organizations around housing. I also trained in, just for fun, in clowning, performance, and I was part of a cabaret collective called Dirty Plots, which is the poster here. Dirty Plots performed in 2014 for the Canadian Association of Theatre Researchers. So cabaret's research praxis, this concept I learned about while working with, and I still work with Dirty Plots performers. Pictured here on the very far right, this is Trixie Kane. She's an alter ego character of media theorist T.L. Cowan. And Trixie Kane is a retired supermodel soccer mom that gives these kind of feminist TED Talks. And here, this photo of the woman all in white. This is Alex Titchlar, who started Dirty Plot. She's a former sex worker, and she was a sex columnist in Toronto, and an incredible performance artist who in her late 50s now has gone back to do her PhD in feminist performance. And to the left is Nari, who's an Egyptian spoken word and rapper, hip hop artist. So together we performed and we and collaborated and wrote about gentrification, police violence, cuts to the gendered and race dimensions of cuts to public transit. So I'm interested in cabaret. This is work that T.L. Cowan, the retired soccer mom character, she writes about cabaret as a transformative methodology, both on and off the stage. So cabaret is a place that embraces failure. And it's good to go ahead with your work because the audience is there to hold your failures. It's awkward and DIY. And I really appreciate it because it's an alternative to very professionalized thought making in the arts and in academia, which I find really affects my mental health. And I always come up with weird voices and characters, and they're not going anywhere. So I feel safe in cabaret. It's an embodied way of engaging in research, dance, clown, alter ego, mask work. And I really like this work because it crosses boundaries. In Toronto, we were made up of artists and non-artists, precarious academics, tenured academics. And rather than fixating on the problems of the neoliberal university, which takes up a lot of our imaginations, we resource each other with funding, with support, finding spaces, co-writing stuff. And I felt like we were always working within and against and beyond institutions. So I find the CERN work is so important for that. Like, yes, we can fixate on the critiquing, but what world building are we doing? So here's some great quotes. If you want to look further about the writing of cabaret as research praxis, T.L. Cowan has this great article called Cabaret Grunt, Up Your Community. And she writes that cabaret consciousness is a mobile ontology and episteme that privileges unpredictability, pleasure, risk, excess, failure, challenge, and confusion. So I love this idea that with students and people we work with, how do we explore pleasure, take risks, possibly fail, but work together to imagine new opportunities and world-making practices. And then this is another great article, which I totally think it's probably one of my favorite articles. You can Google this and find this online, by T.L. Cowan. She writes it together with other folks in the scene, and like so many queer, trans, feminist, and other minoritized artists, past, present, and future. So cabaret is a way to bring into existence a reality that we didn't see elsewhere, designing shows to attract the people we wanted to be together with. We were hacking together our own existences. So I think that's the excitement for me of DIY cabaret and the idea of cabaret as research, It's a way to hack together and to play with and to think about our existences. So what I'm doing in terms of my research in Kamloops, I started a new job for an online university based out of Alberta in August. So I'm very new here. And I am working with Donnie Dreamcatcher. He is also, his real name is Chris Bowes, and he's a Sheklepim artist based here who, interestingly, I know him from way back in high school, and he works for the Kamloops Art Gallery. And we're talking with Athabasca University, where I work, about finding funding and support to pay for elders and knowledge keepers to really have discussions about storytelling and arts practice to work with young people. Donnie works with a group of young Indigenous and settler youth with the art gallery. And we're interested in comedy and storytelling and writing to really take a look at the housing crisis, climate emergency. Okay, so we had 81 wildfires here in the summer. And when I started my job, there was a heat dome and wildfires. So there was 49 degrees Celsius for 2 days in a row, and a community, literally a town nearby, burnt to the ground. So there's a lot of trauma in this area from climate emergency. Also, to add another layer here, this residential so-called schools, there's an uncovering of a lot of murdered children in this area from the so-called schools, which were Indigenous children for generations were forced to attend. And Kamloops was the first city in Canada where the so-called discovery of hundreds of children. So there's a lot of work to be done around trauma and climate emergency and storytelling in this area. So just to show you, we're up here in the middle of this map where it's, that was one of our, every day we're like way up and over and above air quality warnings. This was the left here, like that's the neighborhood that was on fire on July 1st. Thousands of us evacuated the city. Really stressful. And then the air was orange. And then here is a picture of some of the healing ceremonies around residential schools this summer, and they continue. And this is a huge topic with students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, about how do we address these issues in a really truthful, honest way. And also thinking about how these issues, the ongoing white supremacy and genocide is tied to climate emergency in this area. So very heavy. But yeah, I'm interested in comedy and storytelling and really approaching this through a slow scholarship framework that's emergent, thinking through the work of feminist writers and activists, and especially the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, who writes about pleasure activism. And she writes, draws from the work of Audre Lorde and Afrofuturist fiction. And in her book, Pleasure Activism, she talks about some great feminist and queer and Indigenous comedy groups. But she writes that there's a potential in comedy. It's a type of world making, and it's also a type of pleasure and engaging with each other in a fun and safe way. So, and also one of the things I've been reading a lot and thinking about is generative somatics. So this is a type of therapy, a more community engaged therapy that comes from a lot of the work in this area comes from women, Black American feminists, a woman named Prentice, or a non-binary person named Prentice Hill from Black Lives Matter writes a lot about generative somatics. So how do we get into our bodies and learn from our bodies, out of our heads, and really meet each other in conversation and in play. So these are things I'm thinking about and hoping to move towards with my new job at Athabasca and with Donnie Dreamcatcher or Chris Bowes. So this is Donnie or Chris in the corner here with one of the murals he did with some young people in Kamloops of the salmon run. So yeah, that's my makeshift drag king / conversation piece. Thank you very much. Okay. Questions, comments?
We're gonna go. I think, Kate, do you have any preference about going now or going last?
Oh yeah, go at the end.
I'm happy to go now.
Awesome.
So a hard, if not impossible, act to follow. So I'm going to take up the challenge of that. Searching for my share. No. Try that again. There it is. Okay, so hi, I'm speaking to you from the Tasmania, from the land of the unceded land of the Muwinina people. And I take these opportunities, particularly this fantastic opportunity of speaking to and with CERN colleagues, to think out loud. So this will be messy and not quite sure it's going, but I have a few notes. So what I'm really interested in this kind of CERN space of art and theory is something that's come up in the other presentations so far, which is this idea of thinking with materials and materials being practice, which is something that is difficult to articulate in this space and is also really a real opportunity. So I've actually been working with business as a material for about 20 years, and doing that before I was kind of conscious of doing that, I guess. So in 2003, I started a grocery business called Feral Trade that trades coffee and other products along social networks and outside commercial systems. So all of my suppliers and all of the customers are friends or friends of friends, and most, although not all, of the shipments travel in my and other people's bags. So it's kind of DIY underground freight network that works. So I started this just actually for quite practical reasons, and realized the scope of space it allowed to think in, and really interrogating, you know, what is a commodity, how does business work, and how can business be done differently? How can it be done colloquially, paying attention to different kinds of things, and what goes on if you change this or change that? So I was doing this, and then after quite a while, I came across diverse economies thinking and found it as this just extraordinary home that was doing in theory what I realized I was exploring in practice. And to leave out many decades and thousands of projects, this brought me to the Feral MBA, which is what I'm concentrating on now. So this is about thinking about business as a material together with others, with the artists and others who are thinking about business creatively and how business might be different. And it's interesting to me for various ways. And one of them is that thinking of economy draws people back into abstractions often. But thinking with business, it's practice, it's actual. You're in one, you inhabit one, and you transact with them all the time. You go to the shop and you buy something. And also, and it's a real significant difference between artists and academics, although becoming less so, which is that artists are all by nature small businesses. That's how we kind of, you know, survive and transact in the world. So there's something about bringing the structure and nature of our own livelihoods, transactions, how we administrate that, the habits that are involved in that, into the frame that we think with and that we think creatively and experimentally with. So in practice, the Feral MBA is the idea of a radically different training course in business for artists and others. And I've run a couple of pilots, one here in Tasmania and one online, that each went for about a month. So I'm working out how these ideas can kind of become actual. And it's bringing together people who are struggling with questions of livelihood for themselves, and also these questions of how do we think differently in the world. And there was something that I think it was Catherine Gibson said in one of the sessions earlier this week in a discussion. She said something like, she was asking, talking about what are the technologies that we have to actually do community economies in everyday life. And there was another question, how do we embed these things in ways that we don't have to think about them? And she used the example of something that Kevin St. Martin said in his keynote, which I missed, that about embedding the research he's doing about communities at sea in marine law. It's something that's underway. It's just, very exciting way that this way of thinking can enter infrastructure. And another example that I am aware of is the way that legal organizational form, really fantastic organizational forms like community land trusts, embed a way of thinking in, administrative legal infrastructure. So that's one approach to this question. But there's another question there that I think is exciting to me and to artists. How do we embed these ways of thinking in our lives where they actually become very visible and they become things that you do need to think about all the time, but in ways that open possibilities? So again, to get away from abstraction, what the Feral MBA does is work with the materials of business, these sort of background drone of things that we have to deal with on a daily basis that often become outside the thinking, outside the exciting sort of plastic space that could be opened up. So the business plan, for example, and I have to write a business case, and so you take your exciting ideas and you get out the A4 and the aerial and the template. So this is one of the projects that the participants were tasked with, was producing a business plan or a business case in the materials of their own practice. So here you can see a basket of herbs that the herbalist business plan, a pirate treasure map from the painter, quite a complex sculptural kind of performative interaction from the blacksmith that you had to use a mirror and hold a spear and read a set of words that were printed backwards through the mirror. And the printer, the screen printer, printed the certificates for the Feral MBA program. And other materials that I'm working with to think about how these could be sort of engaged with a material level. The budget, for example, again, something that gets tacked onto projects. You have to do it. It's the boring part. It's outside the interesting work. So reconstruct, so that this was the budget for the Feral MBA program that was designed in a form where you have the non-financial, the financial information on one side, but then you have all of the non-financial transactions that accrue on the other, all of the people looking after other people's kids, someone lending someone else a bike, etc. The food, the transport. And all of that goes in the budget. And then the budget was printed by the screen printer and actually became merch for the project that was sold at public events and, of course, re-entered the budget on the financial side. So the budget becomes something that is playful, experimental, that can be, and also is a way of materializing a different way of thinking. Some of these things I've brought together under the banner of RADMIN, Radical Administration, that began as the festival in 2019 and was followed up by a reader. So, and again, this is slightly outside the, but very connected to the frame that diverse and community economies bring, because business is also thinking about what you do with your hands. It's also this kind of bringing in the administrative level, the habit level, the process level that links with but goes beyond the resource and financial side of things, I guess. Business coaching is another medium that I'm playing around with, and with some people who are present here as well. How can the neoliberal technology of business coaching that carries so many implicit assumptions with it, how can that be sort of detoxed and replaced with another set of assumptions? So that's something that I'm working on with a group of people in the CERN network as well. And another material that we were playing with in the Feral MBA is that kind of most toxic icon of the economy, money. And we did experiments with money and resources as bringing them into the room, bringing the budget into the room in another way, and trying that out as a material to play with. And this is all very edgy territory, I guess, because it's really these questions of how we survive and handle these sort of media of the economy. They're every day and they're at our throats and they're personal and they're in our lives. So how to bring these things into the room in a way that can be collectively thought about. Yeah, it's a question that it's working with. And just to sort of mention, to connect to something that came up really strongly for me through Graydon's mention of stitching, and also Catherine, what you, how you reflected on that, is this element of training. That these things aren't things that you resolve in one go, but it's actually something that we need to bring into their everyday and do it again and again in a way that is productive and part of life. And not something that if I have to repeat it, it's a point of failure. Actually having to repeat it is a point of strength. And I've brought physical PE, physical education, physical training, PT, I think it's in other countries, into the Feral MBA. And in the online version, I had my two PE instructors working with people in the Zoom. And we had a lot more fun than you generally do, sitting in chairs. And it was really part of the environment to bring in this idea that you actually gain strength and pleasure by repeating things. So this is what a typical Zoom session would look like. And I just want to finish with the idea of confluence. And which has uncanny resonance with Heather's actually the other guy's throwaway comment around microbreweries and former mining towns. This is a confluence of two rivers in Tasmania, in Queenstown, a former mining town where there's a lot of arts action and microbrewery foundation going on. But where art can sit in the Community Economies project, there is some sort of something for me in this idea of confluence. And here is where the two rivers, the King and the Queen, one polluted from copper mining and the other not, come together. And the pollution metaphor is not what I'm interested in here, but just the way things, the kind of powerful mingling of different ways of thinking in which there would be no presumption that the art would end up being presented as theory, but also, or instead possibly the reverse, that the theory is presented as art, and that's where things end up. So sorry, I'm way less articulate than all of you wonderful academic people. So I will end my rambling there and hope that some of that made some sense. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. It was not at all unformed ramblings. It's brilliant. I'm going to share some resources that Caroline Woolard has sent us. I'm not going to do her full presentation because that would be weird, because I haven't really met her except at our Liviana session last year. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly talk through what she wanted to talk about, or introduce it, and then I'm going to put some links into the chat. But it connects. I'm not talking particularly about what I'm doing in this session because I haven't had time. It's a bit crazy at the moment, but her work connects to what I'm really interested in around different ways in which we think about resourcing the arts, so the kind of funding landscape and the economies of the arts. So Caroline's been doing some amazing work, and here she is with the Art Co-op with Nati Linares, Marina Lopez and Caroline Woolard, and they've been doing lots of work with Art Co-op, including the Study into Action, which has been shared through the CERN network. So the Art Co-op is around growing a solidarity economy movement for artists and culture bearers. And so these are the sort of principles, the kind of that are underpinning what they're doing. And I've just found this really exciting and inspirational for some work that we're trying to get off the ground here. So to actually look at how artists are already building solidarity economies and to try and support and amplify that work, but also to advocate for other ways of thinking about the economy of the arts to funders. So Caroline did a report for the grant makers for the arts in the US, and you can download the report. I'll put the link in, but there's a video about it, so I'm going to share that. So I've lost your faces somehow. Where have you gone? Ah. Sorry, I'm back. Did you see those slides? Yeah, you did. Okay, cool. I'm going to go and share the video now. I lost you altogether. You disappeared from my screen. There we go. Okay, here we go.
What would a cultural economy be like if it loved Black and Indigenous people? All around the country, the people who have been most harmed by our current systems are practicing self-determination and community wealth. The movement for permanently affordable space in Oakland places culture at the center of the work. The first democratically managed investment fund in the country, making non-extractive loans to community members, says cultural workers are economy builders. Culture bearers lead the oldest native co-op in the country. Artists started the oldest non-extractive venture capital firm in the US, a co-op giving 35,000 freelancers the benefit of full-time employment was founded by artists. Black Lives Matter was co-founded by an artist. This work is not new. Creatives are going back to the future, to practices of shared livelihoods rooted in cultural traditions. Why should culture and economic innovation go together? Because right now, we have a superstar system where the winners take all and the rest are left with crumbs. Because just like art, housing and dignified work are human rights. Artists are the original gig workers. Culture making and political organizing go hand in hand. We want a world where everyone's needs are met so everyone can participate in the remaking of culture and society. An artist living in a community land trust in New York City will have 27 hours a week to make art, compared to an artist in market-priced housing who will have 4 hours a week for art making. We must repair centuries of injustice. What do mutual aid networks, worker co-ops, community land trust, participatory budgeting, and time banks have in common? Community ownership and democratic governance that builds political, cultural, and economic power. When these hyperlocal initiatives get together, they have enormous power. This emergent movement goes by many names, but internationally, it's known as the Social and Solidarity Economy, or Solidarity Economy for short. It provides resilience against crisis and has lasting impact when supported as an holistic system. To support this work, you can educate yourself, join existing organizing work, and advocate for economic justice. Organize a book club in your community. Read the book Collective Courage. Study toward action. Find your local credit union, worker co-op, or time bank and join it. Make media about this work, songs, posters, memes, and stories. Make gifts and loans of time, art, and money to seed these groups. Follow the lead of grassroots organizers and commit to long-term support. Advocate for legal and fiscal policies that enable the solidarity economy to thrive. The people who have been most harmed are creating community-controlled, hyper-local economies that are resilient amidst crisis. The systems that artists want are not only possible, they already exist and can be strengthened and cultivated with intention. Learn more. art.coop.
Cool. Yeah, so just really amazing work. And I don't know if anyone else has read the report, but it's still going on my computer somewhere. There we go. Go away. But it's been really useful here as part of conversations we've been trying to have with funders to rethink how it is that they are funding the arts, and to think, and both her work and also the diverse economies and community economies thinking more widely has been informing the work that we've been doing initially around funding for youth arts, but now thinking more broadly about how arts and culture are valued and funded, both in and of themselves and in relation to other areas. So in relation to justice, in relation to health and well-being, in relation to science. So we're trying to get a big cross-faculty project up off the ground here, which would be a university and community partnership around rethinking cultural value and foregrounding creative practice, Indigenous Māori knowledge and Pacifica frameworks, rather than starting with the typical kind of cultural policy models and ways of thinking. So yeah, I'm just really excited to share Caroline's work, and there's some links there if you want to read more about what they're doing. Cool. So we've got 10 minutes now, I think 11 minutes for kind of question and conversation.
Muy poquito.
So short. How can we best use it?
I'm just looking at this question here by Catherine McKinnon.
Yeah.
About how you bring cabaret. To be honest, I had a really bad, just not an easy time at the University of Glasgow. There are people who either love me or thought I was really, this work was, I just sent an article to Acme actually to it. There were impact factors of what community art was supposed to look like, and I was told I was really unprofessional. It was a really weird experience, which whatever, I'm now writing about that. But in terms of high performer, blah, blah, there's some great material from forum theater and movement exercises, and in Zoom, I was just in a forum theater thing a few weeks ago where we all partnered and did movement and stuff with, yeah, like really just getting out of having to be up in the head and have the right answer, but thinking, like everyone's saying, that the practice of the movement or the making as a type of theory in itself. And but I don't know the answer to this. I've tried with different spaces, and some geographers especially just were like, no way, this is so weird. Like I was asked to do something like that in the UK at one place, and a woman slammed her hand down and said, I am not performing, and like the whole room went really quiet, and it was so awkward, which in it, yeah. so I've been hiding out more in feminist performance studies, and I found my people in other types of fields where you're allowed to flourish. Like just this week, I was in the Concordia University conference, and most of the people there have alter egos, and we're gonna get money to meet together and have all our alter egos. And we're calling it the LARPer-onference. Like we think we're like live action role players, like LARPers. And we're interested in sharing, yeah, so feminist performance theory, I found a little place to hide, but that's the big question, how to make this safe and comfortable in other spaces. I'm going to keep working on it, but it makes me go into a shame spiral too. So there's stuff I can keep working on.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I've really been pushed further along this because, you know, I felt like I spend a lot of my career learning how to perform the academic, right? Which is totally a performance, but it's not a very heartful one. It's not a very nurturing one often. So it's okay. How do we pull back from that and actually be an academic in a way that's full and nurturing? And I have a couple of members of my center who are Indigenous men who do a lot of rejecting of the performance criteria and a lot of wanting to teach and learn and do research in more embodied knowing kind of ways. Yeah. And it's hard to figure out how to make them acceptable to the academic space. Yes, Heather, go.
One more thing, there's a really good thing from CERN people. It's an arts-based research methods book that it's a PDF and I can send it, but there's wonderful mask activities, movement activities. They're really lovely. And I've done those with students online where like you embody like an animal or a plant and think about the non-human. And there's so that is a wonderful resource. So more
I'm getting, Catherine, next week in our school meeting, because we've been on Zoom for ages, I'm doing a version of the activity that we did at Liviana last week, where I'm getting them to put things in the squares, Aviv, that they have to draw or write or put a sculpture or an object into the squares that speaks about what inspires them as a teacher in critical studies and education where we are. And I'm just trying to make people because we have, you know, things are a bit political in my school at the moment. So we're trying to kind of shift the conversation away from, and there is going to be a political conversation around the new principles for how they're allocating workload, but trying to proceed that with a different way of interacting and knowing about each other. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'll report back.
I wanted to comment on what you just said, that I'm teaching online too, but our university started to go the dual system, which they call it hybrid system. So if we want, we can petition to be on campus. So I did. So next week I'm going to be teaching on campus, my last class, and that's their evaluation. So during the semester, because of the way I teach, we have assemblies in every class. And during the assemblies, we made a decision as to how to evaluate our learning. And we are using visual arts and music as ways of doing that. It's like a huge activity we're putting together next Monday. So I can tell you after Monday what happened, but it's interesting. And in regards to Catherine's question, I think it's a difficult line to cross, meaning that you sometimes need to take risks. And sometimes the way I've been doing that with the classes I teach is easier for me, because usually students are much more receptive than my colleagues. But with my colleagues, I sometimes take very small risks, which I'm going to try and summarize very briefly, which is, for example, here in Buenos Aires, but this is when we were not in pandemia, but I would have to go to meetings where we evaluate projects and we evaluate colleagues and this and that and the other. And I would dress in a way that I would have on like scarves on my skirt, right? And so when the discussion gets heated, since I had like 2 scarves on, I would stand up, start walking on the room and take one of my scarves off. So that whole performance is like, what is she doing, right? It's like, what? So I don't need to say anything. I just do that. And people start thinking, what's going on here? You know, it's like a reframing of the whole scene. So I do that, for example, when people, because it's pretty usual, unfortunately, in Argentina, that when people are evaluating other people's projects, even if they, for ethical reasons, could not be in the room because, say, they know the person, they would be bombarding the project because they know the person and they don't want the project to pass. And so when I perceive that, I would do that performance just to shift the frame of that discussion, so to speak. So it's kind of weird. I know maybe you wouldn't want to do this. I enjoy it, but that's me, you know.
I had one reflection I had after listening to everybody is how much I want to bring people physically here and to go physically to where you are. Like I want to go also and visit your tiny house very much when it comes into being. And I just love some of the examples that you shared. Like I quite want to do those. I'd quite like to make biodegrading sanitary products in my kitchen. That would be awesome. And Kate, and also Kat McKinnon, I really want to bring you here to do some workshops with arts organizations around. I'd love to do the making your business plan out of the materials that you work with, but also I really want to do a workshop, Kat, around getting people to do kind of more visual drawn theories of change as well. I just think just to share some of these things more widely, I'm just, yeah, so much potential in everybody's work.
Thank you very much. I have to go to sleep. It's been an extremely long day and it's bedtime here. Yeah. Okay, you know, you can all reach me. You're very welcome to reach out. And I'd love to meet you all somehow, somewhere, and keep in touch in email until we meet. Take care.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. I also have to go and drop kids at school now. So this has been wonderful. Thank you for letting me sit in. Yeah. And thanks for the wonderful ideas. I feel like I have to, before I can do any of that performance work with my colleagues, I really have to figure out how to let go of the ego I've got tied up with my academic identity. I've got to do some work there. Yeah, but
find the right prop, the right beard or
yeah. Yeah. Yes. Good plan. All right. Thank you so much.
My friend refers to alter ego, the alter ego conference. That's the point. She said we're gonna have alter egos and then we're gonna alter the ego of the university. So she was playing with words last week, but I don't know, some tiny incremental thing with a beard. I don't know. Yeah.
The beard is very radical compared to what I do. You know, taking off just one piece of clothing is like nada, but the beard is, I like that one.
I thought they were, one that struck me, what you just saying, Heather, about that beard as well, about how everyone kind of gave examples of art as, I was thinking of arts as lines of flight away from the hegemonic face or the center, and how it can create or crystallize new kind of spaces for people to inhabit, and how powerful that is. And I always wonder where we would be without that, you know. Sometimes, of course, it goes back to the center, which can be a positive thing, I guess, as well, if it's shifting how people live more broadly. I think of examples like RuPaul's Drag Race, for instance, how that become massively popular, or even Indigenous hip hop here in Australia, for instance, how you can, you know, it's not just, I was at this play and it was set somewhere in Australia, but it was about these two young Indigenous guys. One was wanting to be a rapper, and he was kind of he had these lyrics which were like Tupac lyrics basically, and rapping about those same things about killing people, about doing this and that and everything. And And then his friend was like, what are you doing? You should, talk about something that means to you or whatever. And he started offering these alternative lyrics about, the struggles that they might have had as young Indigenous men on this colonized land. And yeah, I think that was really interesting how this play pointed out, and you can see it also in types of rappers that are coming out in Australia, that's super accepted, that almost like maybe you should be rapping about those things rather than something a bit maybe I might say blander or less political, I suppose. So yeah, so anyway, it's interesting how art goes its own way and creates this new space, but then sometimes also comes back to the center and creates change as well.
Your comments making me think of the rhizomatic thing that Ozza was saying about don't scale up, but we're moving rhizomatically in different ways. And then it makes me think of Kate, like who thought to like grow rhizomatically and then kind of grow into and repurpose an MBA, or like it's kind of like going in and out of the cracks through different, whether performance, textiles, the digging also of that river, but like all these like, yeah, like different practices are growing new shapes. And then the trick is, do we have then flip that into theory? But that's the theory, that the shapes that are growing. And I love the picture of those rhizomatic things. And then when Kate was talking, I was thinking of rhizomatic critters chewing away at the MBA, creating a feral MBA. So we're all kind of wiggling around. So that's what I feel like I'm drawing. It's kind of like an ecosystem where people are creating.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
cool.
also about flipping the theory into the materials. It really needs to be, we always need to counterweight that these things flow both ways, and that's where it's valuable.
Cool. I'm aware of time. I think we should finish, but just to say it isn't the end of the conversation. We're hopefully going to carry on meeting as the kind of ABCDE, arts-based community and diverse economies, community of practice, and thinking and making projects and doing some things over the coming year. So it'll be great to see you all again in another Zoom, or maybe next year I might see some of you in person if they'll let us out and back in of this country, but we'll see. So yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to take 1 minute to thank Carrie for all the work you've been doing for Liviana. So muchas gracias. Finally, we met.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah, gracias.
No problem.
And thanks for everyone. It makes me so happy you're all out there. I'm officially forever on an online university. I live in COVID for life. So I'm happy you're all out there doing such cool stuff. So I'd love to keep thinking about stuff and sharing ideas with students. So thank you for your work.
Aviv, do you want to say anything before we finish?
So much to say, actually. It's yeah, it's hard to finish because just like I actually like have a lot to say about different things that were said, but no time. So I think, yeah, like you said, we're gonna continue this conversation. So that's the most important thing about it.
Ka kite koutou. Thank you again for all your presence and your contributions, and go well into your nights and days and weeks and weekends, and we'll see you again very soon.